Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to once again welcome you on behalf of the Board of Directors to the 2025 Annual General Meeting for Percheron Therapeutics Limited. There's little need to remind shareholders of the various challenges the company has faced over the past 12 months. And I want to take this opportunity to once again express my personal gratitude and appreciation for the continued support that Percheron has received from the vast majority of shareholders throughout this difficult period. Your pragmatism and your patience are the reason that the company has persevered. But more than that, you, the shareholders, are the reason that Percheron is now working towards an exciting and promising future. Indeed, we believe that our new program, HMBD-002, is one of the most exciting assets in the Australian biotech landscape today, and we look forward to demonstrating its potential. As you know, we recently released the phase 1 results. The study has completed its phase 1 human trial, which incidentally was done under an FDA IND under one of the most stringent regulators. The drug is shown to be very safe and well tolerated, so it's passed its first major hurdle. Our task now is to conduct a phase 2 trial to demonstrate its efficacy in one or more types of cancer. And you'll shortly hear from our CEO, Dr. Garner, how we plan to approach that task. The plans you will hear are the product of extensive research, reflection, and consultation over the past 4 months. The team has spoken with leading experts from around the world in cancer immunology, with practicing oncologists, with regulatory specialists, and with potential future appropriate partners. The board's strategy has been guided by 3 considerations, which I want to share with you now. First, a drug which shows efficacy in any type of cancer immediately adds very substantial value to that asset. And it follows that our priority is therefore to do that, to show efficacy in any type of cancer. So we want to identify the target populations who provide the lowest risk opportunity of demonstrating that efficacy signal. What do I mean by that? That's not necessarily that we would start with what a registration indication is, or a big registration indication. All of them potentially are registration indications once you demonstrate efficacy. But if you've got an idea of, lung cancer, it's not likely that we're going to start in lung cancer, the biggest, one of the biggest, colon cancer. We're going to select, as I said, that target population which provides the lowest risk to us to demonstrate the efficacy signal. If we show HMBD-002 works, of course, larger studies, bigger indications will follow. But our priority must be to obtain that initial signal of efficacy. Secondly, we are very mindful that the company's resources are limited. It's not realistic to contemplate a very large financing to fund an enormous trial and say, as I said, lung or colon cancer. We are thinking creatively about how to use what we have to obtain the kind of data that opens the door to future partnering activity. Our job is not necessarily to take HMBD to commercialization. Rather, what we aim to do is to validate the drug and the science to an extent that will allow that appropriate pharma to recognize its value. Finally, and with the memory of the company's previous programs still fresh in our minds, the board is determined to minimize the exposure risk to our shareholders, to that binary risk that we experienced previously. So put simply, we do not intend to put all our eggs in one basket with HMBD-002. James will explain the phase 2 program that we plan to implement, and it's designed to give us multiple shots on goal, multiple opportunities to win, so that we can reduce that risk to shareholders. To be clear, though, the development of a new cancer drug is complex. It's risky and it's time-consuming. But within the broad reality of the field in which we operate, there's much that we can do to minimize risk, to accelerate readouts and reduce cost, and so to return value to shareholders in a more immediate time frame rather than the 5 years it might be in some other indications. The board and management team have drawn on our multiple years of experience in drug development to realize these opportunities. And we're very excited about the work ahead with this asset. Behind the scenes, we have been quietly retooling the company for this new strategy. And you will have seen some recent announcements about our new executive appointments. But in addition to that, there's been much going on. We're already a very different company from the one we were 12 months ago. And circumstances have obliged us to reinvent ourselves. And we've chosen this obligation to do so as an opportunity rather than an adversity. And I'd encourage all our shareholders to take a similar perspective, as you have done in our earlier votes this year. For better or worse, the legacy business of antisense therapeutics is gone. But the company that stands here today has the potential to be tremendously exciting and successful business. Each of us is absolutely dedicated to making it so, and we look forward to embarking on this new journey with you, our shareholders. In closing, I want to again gratefully acknowledge my fellow non-executive director, Gil Price, whose perseverance over the past 12 months has been exceptional, and his support to myself and James has been unwavering. I also pay tribute to our CEO, Dr. James Garner, and his management team, and particularly to Ms. Ambrosini, whose efforts, the two of them particularly, have steered this company through very turbulent waters. It's not evident to everybody, but they spent many after hours and time and their personal time dedicated reaching out to many shareholders after hours to speak to them and give them an understanding of what we were doing. And I'm really very grateful for their efforts. Finally, I want to thank you again, our shareholders, not just for your fortitude, but for your fundamental optimism. Drug development can test the resolve of even the most strongest hearts. And I can tell you it's tested my resolve this last 12 months. And we have seen this demonstrated by our shareholders who have stuck with us. And thank you to those new shareholders that have come in and believed what we are doing. The opportunity to bring forward new medicines for patients in need is not only a good investment, but it's also an important contribution to humanity. And we are grateful that our shareholders have refused to lose sight of that goal. Thank you. I will now hand over to Dr. Garner to deliver his presentation as announced to the ASX this morning. Thanks, James.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Once again, I'm James Garner. I'm the Chief Executive here at Percheron, and it's a pleasure to add my own welcome to today's general meeting of shareholders. This is my 10th annual general meeting as CEO of a public company. It's my third as CEO of this company. And well, let's just say it's been quite the year. But I think despite the vicissitudes we've all been through during the first half of this year, I remain incredibly optimistic about Percheron and tremendously excited about the future of this company. I really want to spend the next 20, 30 minutes talking about why that is. And I want to start, first of all, just by recapping some of the last few months and just reminding people of the extraordinary journey we've been on since late June. On the 27th of June, as you've heard, we licensed in a new asset to the company, HMBD-002, a phase 2 ready oncology drug that sits in the very, very exciting, very leading edge area of immuno-oncology. And of course, we'll be talking about that today. We spent a couple of months in the third quarter bringing that drug under our custody. And when you buy a new medicine, it's not a straightforward task. There's a lot of administrative and regulatory work that goes on behind the scenes. So we've been through that work through July, August, and September. We've started the work of manufacturing a new batch of drug. As you'll recall, that is the responsibility of our licensor under the contract that we signed, but we've been sitting alongside them to make sure that goes smoothly. We saw some very promising new preclinical data published in July and August from teams at Stanford University and the University of Texas Southwestern. Gives us even further encouragement that our drug is active and suggests some of the potential opportunities that we may pursue with it. And then over the last couple of months, as the chair has noted, we've been rebuilding the team, rebuilding the business, and getting out there trying to reintroduce the company to investors. I think we've had this long period in the first half of the year, which I've often described as being like in the corporate equivalent of intensive care. And we've really had to get back out and show people we're here. A few weeks ago, we shared very positive data from the phase 1 clinical trial of HMBD-002. I won't go through that again today, but the webinar that we held is available online via our website for anybody who wants to review. And really the last piece in the puzzle, I think the thing that sets us up now as we move into 2026 is to talk about what we're going to do with the drug, to talk about our plans for the phase 2 trial of 002. And we're going to do that today. Before I do, I just want to take a step back and talk a little bit about what we've been trying to achieve in a more conceptual sense with this, because as you all well know, the company has been through this exceptionally challenging experience, what I would almost describe as a near-death experience. But I do want to say that companies do recover from these experiences. This is an example of a company, Exelixis, in the United States. They had a very similar experience to us. They had a drug, cabozantinib, in development for prostate cancer. They released negative trial data and very quickly saw about an 85% drawdown in their share price, about the same as what happened to us the end of last year. And no doubt at the time, this felt like something that might be the end of the company. But if you actually zoom out and look at this in the context of the couple of years that followed, the company rebounded very quickly. Within 18 months, it reclaimed its peaks. And certainly for investors who came in at the bottom, when things looked bleakest, the return over the subsequent 2 years was 844%. So it's an example of how companies can sometimes bounce back from these kinds of experiences. Another example here, Vertex. A few years ago, their lead product, a Kalydeco, a cystic fibrosis drug, received what we call a complete response letter from FDA. That's a polite way of saying FDA says no. And again, lost about half of their market cap overnight. But again, over the subsequent 12, 18, 24 months, very quickly bounced back and recovered. And again, for astute investors that are prepared to recognize the long-term value that these situations generate, the opportunity and the return was very substantial. And finally, just another example to illustrate this, Biogen, they had a drug called Tysabri, natalizumab, for multiple sclerosis, was withdrawn by the FDA. And again, the company lost about half of its value on the day. And well, you know how the story goes. It quickly rebounded over the next year or so. Tysabri was reintroduced to the market, only the second drug in history to do so. And I remember this well because I worked in the company at the time. And for many of us, we thought this might be the end of the business. But in fact, it was anything but. And so I think these examples give you some sense that biotech is a game of ups and downs. But as I say, companies with strong fundamentals, with strong boards, and with supportive shareholders can absolutely claw their way back. And I think there is much opportunity for us to claw back, because if you look at us in comparison to peer companies on the ASX, we've sort of illustrated a few of them here, you can certainly get a sense that it wouldn't take very much for us to really just revert to the mean, to come into the middle of this pack. And that in itself would represent a very substantial return for shareholders. So this is what we are trying to work towards as a board, as a management team. This is really the objective that underlies everything we've been doing. over the course of this year, particularly in recent months. So let me talk a little bit about the field that we now find ourselves in, because as the chair noted, the company is now very different from the business that you would have seen last year. We are now, by virtue of the in-licensing of 002, a cancer company. We retain an interest in rare diseases, and we may return to that space. But for practical purposes, our lead asset now is a cancer drug. And so we sit as an oncology company. And it's almost trite to say that cancer remains one of the most important healthcare challenges of the 21st century. About half of us will at some point in our life receive a cancer diagnosis, and sad to say, about a quarter of us will pass away from it. And although we have made enormous progress as an industry in improving the prospect for cancer patients, there is still a huge unmet need. There is still a huge requirement for new therapies, particularly in some of these difficult, hard-to-treat cancers that we'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. So we're playing in the big game. And this is not just one of the most pressing societal problems, but this is one of the most important parts of our industry. Over the last 20 years, roughly 1 out of every 3 drugs that has been approved by FDA has been a cancer drug. It dwarfs all other therapeutic areas. And when you look at growth forecasts for the pharmaceutical industry, a very, very substantial part of that growth resides in oncology as a therapeutic area. Even very rapidly growing areas like obesity, thanks to drugs like Ozempic, remain very, very much smaller than cancer would take in aggregate. And for small companies like ours, it is in fact a very, very attractive business to be operating in, because in general, the clinical trials for cancer drugs are smaller than for other therapeutic areas. Earlier in my career, I worked in diabetes, and the typical clinical trials for a diabetes drug the registrational trials are 3,500 patients each. You generally need 3 of them. It's about a $1.5 billion exercise to take a new diabetes drug to market. By contrast, as you can see here, for a cancer drug obtaining accelerated approval, the median number of patients in a registration trial was 93. So gives us a real sense that this is almost 2 orders of magnitude smaller in terms of the patient requirement. And partly because of that, it's faster. We can generally get oncology drugs to market several years ahead of other therapeutic areas. And we get a great deal of support from FDA. There are so-called special designations, things like fast track designation, breakthrough designation, orphan designation, are much more liberally applied to cancer drugs than to most other therapeutic areas. So we are working in a space where small companies like ours are not merely competitive, but in many respects advantaged. And as we look towards a commercial product, as we look beyond the development life of a cancer drug, we see that this is actually also a very, very attractive commercial space. For new cancer drugs approved between 2020 and 2024, the median annual treatment cost was $350,000 US. That's the median. As you can see from the slide, about 16% of those drugs had an annualized treatment cost in excess of $400,000. So these are very, very profitable products when they reach market. And as the chair noted earlier, very often in cancer, we see drugs approved initially for one group of patients, but to extend that approval over their life. When you launch a new diabetes drug, it usually launches in diabetes, and that's it. But cancer drugs have a very, very much more complex and nuanced life. And I've shown an example here of pembrolizumab, which was originally launched in 2014 as a melanoma drug. But over subsequent years, has seen on average about 4 to 6 new approvals each year. Every few months, there's a new patient group coming available for this drug. And you can see the impact that has on its annual sales as the drug reaches ever greater numbers of patients. So again, this is a very, very attractive commercial space. I want to just briefly touch on the science of where we sit. I said a moment ago that we sit in the field of immuno-oncology, and I've said before that this is really one of the most exciting scientific areas of the 21st century. As we've touched on in previous presentations. This was the basis of the 2018 Nobel Prize for Medicine. And the basic outline is this, that ordinarily in healthy people, our immune system protects us against cancer in just the same way it protects against bacteria and viruses. Our immune cells pick up nascent cancer cells and remove them. And for cancer to become established, it has to block that process. And you can see in the second figure there, diagrammatically, a cancer cell blocking this immune response. So we've seen multiple classes of new therapies that try to reactivate and to augment that immune response. So in the top right there, you see a technology space for cancer vaccines. Hasn't actually been as promising as we originally hoped, but there's been a few notable examples of cancer vaccines where we've effectively, just in the way that any other vaccine does, we've stimulated the immune system to fight cancer. Down in the bottom right, a technology space called CAR-T, chimeric antigen receptor T cells. This is a very busy space. I've lost track of how many hundreds of companies there are working here. As yet, only shown benefit in blood cancers, hematological malignancies, but potentially in the future for solid tumors. We are literally injecting new immune cells into a patient here to strengthen their immune response. But then in the top left here, the biggest and the most substantial of these immuno-oncology fields, checkpoint inhibitors. These are drugs that modulate the control mechanisms of the immune system, reactivate it, stimulate it to fight the tumor. And among checkpoint inhibitors, there are now probably about 8 or 9 approved drugs. We've just shown 6 of them on the slide here, but even just the top 4 of those in 2023 accounted for about $40 billion of annual sales. So this has been not just an extraordinarily exciting scientific field, not just an absolutely game-changing innovation for clinicians and for patients, but it has also been an enormous commercial opportunity. This is the field in which we sit. To be clear, HMBD-002 is a checkpoint inhibitor. We hope that it will one day join the drugs that you see on this slide. And in particular, we're excited by some of the ways that this drug may combine with some of these existing therapies. Some of you will have seen this slide before in our general corporate presentation. This shows some of the preclinical data for 002, and as you can see, it has shown a very, very consistent and very substantial anti-tumoral effect in a whole range of animal models of cancer. But the data on the right is the really interesting nuance. This is our drug in combination with pembrolizumab, the most successful of these checkpoint inhibitors. And as you can see here in this particular animal model, at least, the combination almost completely shut down growth of the tumor. And this is a big part of what excited us about the drug when we were first looking at it, and I think suggests some of the ways in which we take it forward. And as a reminder, we are not at the beginning of this journey. The drug has completed the great bulk of all the preclinical work that is required for a new medicine. It has successfully completed phase 1. We've seen very positive data out of that trial, as we noted earlier. And we have, among other things, a well-developed manufacturing process. We have an open IND with FDA. A great deal of legwork has been done. And so we sit now on the cusp of taking this drug into phase 2 human trials. So let's talk about that. Let's talk now about our planned phase 2 trial. And as you heard a moment ago, we've spent a great deal of time and energy over the last few months really trying to design the right trial for this drug. And we're very excited about the story that's emerging here. We're excited to share it with you today. And obviously, more detail will follow. We're a few months into this journey. The study will start next year, but I'm really pleased to be able to share the outline of this. And to begin with, I wanted to just try and give you a sense of what we're trying to solve for and to really share with you the task that the board has challenged the company to realize. And there's 5 key objectives here that we've been looking for. The first, as you heard in the chair's address, is we want to make sure we have multiple shots on goal here. We want to avoid the all or nothing bet that is so often a challenge for small companies like ours. So our phase 2 study will examine 002 in several different tumor types in parallel. We'll talk a little bit in a moment about how we do that, but this will not just be a study in a single patient population. population. This will give us access to multiple different cancer types. And to be clear, we only need one of those to win. We only need one of these patient populations to respond to the drug, and we can then focus around that and use that as a basis to move towards registration. The second thing we've been trying to solve for is to maintain the very highest degree of operational flexibility in the trial. We need to be realistic that our financial resources are very, very far from infinite. And so we've designed a study that gives us the ability in many ways to titrate the scale and pace of the study to our resources and to the emerging data that we see from the study as it continues. So we've got a very, very modular study, a very flexible study. It gives us a very, very high ability to accommodate our own circumstances and our means. Third, we want to be able to share with you as investors and to share with potential partners and future investors a regular cadence of data and communication. So the study has been designed to produce regular, frequent readouts. The big pharma approach to this sort of thing is to start a study that will take 3 years, and at the beginning, the drug goes into a tunnel, and then it emerges at the other end and presents the results. We can't do that. That's absolutely not realistic for our companies. So we've designed a study that has many stepping points along the way that will give us really quite a clear, almost real-time picture of how the drug is progressing. Our study is what we call an adaptive trial. So it gives us the ability to focus during the trial on those patient populations that look most promising. We don't have to hardwire into the study everything we expect to happen. We can be guided by the data as it emerges. And particularly when we're working in a very new area such as this, that ability to adapt to the data is vital. And then finally, the end game here is to seek a commercialization partner for this drug, and ultimately to seek accelerated approval from FDA. So we've tried to build into this study the earliest and most frequent opportunities to do that. So here's how we do it. The study will involve multiple arms, and diagrammatically we've shown on this slide 4 arms, but there's nothing magical about that number. We may have 3, we may have 5, we may have 6, we may even have 10. There's no minimum or maximum limit on this, but we will have multiple arms in the study which will run in parallel. Each arm will recruit a defined patient population. For example, one arm might recruit high-grade serous ovarian cancer. Another arm might recruit liver cancer, and so on. And so in many ways, each of these arms resembles a distinct phase 2 clinical trial. However, all of the arms run under a single clinical trial protocol, which means that we do everything once instead of 3 or 4 or 5 times. We have one contract with a contract research organization. We do one submission to FDA. We do one ethics submission to each site. We have one logistics provider for the study. We have one data management setup. And because of that, we can realize enormous economies of scale by doing it this way. If we were to try and run 3 or 4 or 5 contemporaneous clinical trials, that would be completely unrealistic for a company our size. But to run one clinical trial with multiple arms in it is very feasible. And so this approach has been designed to give us great efficiencies and, as I say, enormous economies of scale. The individual arms do not have to start simultaneously. This isn't like F1, where all the cars are on the starting grid and the light turns green and they all race off simultaneously. We can start these arms as we please. So for example, if we find that a particular arm, some of the sites are ready to go right now, we can start today, but then if it's going to take an extra couple of months for another arm to start, we can accommodate that without delaying the first arm. And importantly, we can, as I mentioned earlier, balance things according to our resources. So as our finances progress alongside the study, we can decide exactly how to pace the startup of these multiple arms. At the other end, These arms read out individually, so we don't have to wait for every arm to complete before we share data. We can share data from each arm as it matures. And so, as I say, in many ways, this resembles distinct clinical trials, but as I say, with all the efficiencies and the savings that go with running this as a single trial. So that's the broad concept. Now, just to add a little bit more detail to this, within each arm, the study has a very, very modular design. So diagrammatically here, we've zoomed in on one of the arms, arm 4, just to really give you a sense of what actually happens within an individual arm. And crucially, we envisage each arm having 2 quite distinct stages. The first stage is an exploratory stage, which is really looking to just get a sort of general sense that the drug works in that particular patient population. Typically, the exploratory stage will recruit 20 to 25 patients. The exact number will be guided by statisticians. It may, in some arms, be 18 patients. In another arm, it might be 26. But it's that sort of ballpark. It's a couple of dozen patients as a rule. And that will just give us a sort of general sense about the drug's efficacy. And it'll give us the confidence to move forward in that particular patient group. In the arms that look most promising, we will then advance to a confirmatory stage, a second stage, which you can see here illustrated on the diagram. Now, that confirmatory stage will be a randomized controlled design. And the comparator will depend on the exact patient population we're looking at. It may be pembrolizumab, it may be other drugs, but this will be a randomized controlled trial. As so many of our shareholders know, randomized controlled clinical trial data is the gold standard. That is really what regulatory agencies want to see for an approval. And this confirmatory stage will provide that data. Now, as you can see here, we've given an indicative range, 40 to 100 patients in this confirmatory stage. Again, that will be guided by statisticians. It will depend on the efficacy of the comparator therapy, pembrolizumab or whatever it may be. It will depend on the treatment effect we expect to see. So that will be something that we adjust as we go. But this will be the randomized controlled data that will really give us the definitive proof for the drug. So by breaking it up this way, we achieve a couple of things. We get to test the drug in a relatively fast and inexpensive way before we advance it to the confirmatory stage. But we also get to refine the population, because if we see in the exploratory stage that certain groups of patients work better than others, we have the ability to flex the exact patients that we recruit into the confirmatory part. So again, it gives us this very high degree of adaptive flexibility in the study. The decision to graduate any given arm from the exploratory stage to the confirmatory stage is ours. It doesn't get forced upon us. It's not mandated statistically or by anything else. And we can be guided to some extent by commercial realities as well as scientific realities in that decision. And to be clear, it is not expected that all the arms will graduate. This is designed to be a filtration process. It's designed to be a selection process. We are trying here to focus the drug on a couple of indications where we think it has the most chance of success. So we will see some of these arms that look more promising than others in the exploratory stage, and those will be the ones that we take forward to the confirmatory stage. So what will the arms be? Well, at this stage, there are 4 patient groups that we are most focused on. And look, as I say, this continues to be an evolving discussion, but I think we're confident enough at this stage to share with you our thinking as of today, which really envisages 4 patient groups. So the first of these is triple-negative breast cancer. This is a subset that represents about 15 to 20% of breast cancer cases. It is the most aggressive and the most hard to treat form of breast cancer. Pembrolizumab works a little bit here, but it doesn't work particularly well. And so there is a huge need for new therapies here. And so we think this is a promising potential indication for our drug. We saw some very positive data from the team at Texas that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. Really encourages us. We have a little bit of other work actually going on that will help us to refine our thinking here. But we think triple negative breast cancer is a high priority. Lung cancer is the most common cancer in the world, and certainly to go head on into lung cancer as en masse, if you like, would not be feasible for us. But we do think there is a subgroup within lung cancer which looks very promising, and that is specifically patients with EGFR mutant lung cancer, epidermal growth factor receptor mutant lung cancer. This again represents, let's say, somewhere around 15% of the lung cancer population. And again, it's a population that is not very responsive to existing immunotherapy, doesn't get a lot of benefit from drugs like pembrolizumab. So we think this is a really interesting population, one that the clinicians we've spoken to have pointed us towards. Deep breath, HER2 negative esophageal adenocarcinoma, cancer of the esophagus in plain English. The majority of cases are what we call HER2 positive, and those patients do respond to a drug called Herceptin, which is more commonly used for breast cancer. They don't respond great, in fairness, but they do get some benefit from it. But for those that are HER2 negative, this is a disease that really doesn't have great treatment options, and again, one where we think we've got potentially something to offer. And then finally, endometrial cancer, the most common form of uterine cancer. We'll probably do some further refinement here in terms of the exact definition of the patient population. But again, a disease that once it spreads outside the uterus becomes extremely difficult to treat, and one where we think we may be able to help. So these right now are the 4 cancer types that are most in focus. We may add to this list, may even substitute to it, but these are our 4 high priority indications, and this is where the bulk of our attention is. So finally, I just want to give you a little bit of a sense of some of the practicalities here. This is a rather dense slide, but of course, this is available from our website for people to study afterwards. And we're all adults here, so I want to be very transparent that this is work in progress. We have not yet budgeted this study to the very last cent. We're at the stage of broad estimations and forecasts here. But we'll be spending the early part of next year on the setup of this study, but we do aim to start recruiting somewhere in the middle part of the year. If we do that, it will most likely position us for an initial data readout, in effect from the exploratory stage of the first arm, somewhere in 2027. Now, if we can do that a little bit faster, of course we will, but at this stage, I'm going to say 2027 for the first data readout here. We'll continue to adjust and refine that as we see the study progress and as we see it start up and as we see how recruitment goes. And really from then on, there will be this, as I say, regular cadence of readouts from the study, from exploratory stages, confirmatory stages, and so on. Now, some shareholders have sort of said to me, well, goodness, that's a long time to wait for value-driving news. But and look, I completely understand the point, because it is these data readouts that represent the opportunity for biotech companies to see these huge 8-10-fold jumps overnight. But along the way, there will be a lot of things happening that individually represent opportunities for the stock to get some energy into it. Operational milestones like initiating site ethics submissions, ethics approvals, things like that, starting recruitment, and in parallel regulatory activities, orphan designation, things like that. All of these are generally value drivers for a biotech company. So as we get into the executional part of this, the company will be busy, and that will be reflected in the news flow, and I think that will start to be reflected in the way that investors regard the company. Now, in terms of what this is all going to cost, we obviously have to recognize where the company is starting from here, and we've really just provided some very high-level indicative figures here today. As I say, it's just not feasible to give you budget that is precise to the last dollar today, but want to give you sort of a rule of thumb to start thinking about this. And within the industry, we tend to sort of work on a broad assumption of about $150,000 per patient. That figure varies. It's usually a bit more in phase 1. It can sometimes be a bit less in phase 3. But as a crude rule of thumb, it actually ends up being surprisingly helpful. And if you apply that to the sort of numbers of patients we're talking about, it gives you the sense that we're looking at $4.5, $5 million per exploratory stage of each arm. So as a sort of guide, I think that hopefully gives you a sense of where the company's cash requirements are likely to be over the next, let's say, 24 months or so. And finally, the blue boxes down at the bottom of the slide here are really the points that we're most excited about here. When can we start talking to partners? Well, look, in reality, those discussions start happening very soon. But I think the point at which partners will start to get excited is when we can really show them some efficacy data. So when we start to get some of these exploratory stages maturing, we can show them convincing efficacy data from a phase 2 study. I think that is when the rubber hits the road for partnering. And that will hopefully be within the next 18 months or so. And then we expect that the randomized data will be the minimum that's required for regulatory approval. And so that pushes us out probably another sort of 12 to 18 months. But it gives you a sense of what the next sort of 18 to 36 months looks like for the company. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I guess just in conclusion, I said at the beginning of the presentation, I'm optimistic and excited for the company's future. I hope you can see as we talk about these plans why that is. I think we've designed a study that is innovative and appropriate for where we are, but also a study which really has enormous potential to move this drug forward and to drive value for our shareholders. And so I think the company now goes into 2026 with a great deal to feel excited about and a great deal of work to do, but a great deal of promise ahead of it. And look forward to working on that and sharing our progress with you in the year ahead. Thank you very much. I'm going to open now for questions. I know we've had a couple come in through the online platform. I'll maybe give first right of refusal to the folks in the room. Deborah, we had any from online there? I know we had a couple coming in, right? Oh, sure. So so the first question here, why would you expect the results of the planned phase 2 study to differ from the results of the phase 1 study? Assume the 002 phase 1 study. And look, in one sense, I hope they don't, because the phase 1 study was a very positive study. It showed the drug to be extremely safe. I think that is one of its key attractions, and I certainly hope that continues to be the case in phase 2. But I think we also need to recognize phase 2 studies are by design very, very different from phase 1 studies. So this, the phase 2 study will recruit, in general, patients at a much earlier stage of the disease. Those who tuned in for the phase 1 data will recall that these were very, very advanced patients, on average 4 or 5 prior lines of treatment. We won't be recruiting these very, very late stage patients in our phase 2 study. And in general, by the time patients are 4th or 5th line, they really are in the end game of their disease. We'll be dealing with earlier patients. The other thing to remember is that in a phase 1 study, these are what we call dose escalation studies. We start with very, very tiny doses of the drug, and we build it up. It's only really the last couple of cohorts, generally, where we hit a dose of the drug that we would expect to be efficacious. And so as a result, in any phase 1 study, by design, the majority of patients have a subtherapeutic dose. In our phase 2 study, all the patients will get a dose that is expected to be therapeutic. So instead of 3/4 of the patients being, in effect, unlikely to contribute to efficacy, in this study, all the patients should be contributing. So very, very different kind of study design, very different patient population, very different objectives, and that just reflects the natural difference between a phase 1 and a phase 2 study. Second question here, will the phase 2 study be open label so that you can see how patients are progressing? Yes. is the short answer. We will almost certainly run the study as an open label study. Just to manage expectations, as I noted a few weeks ago, we know that there are some companies out there that are breathlessly reporting every single patient almost on a weekly basis. It's not actually in everybody's interest that we do that. It can really rub the regulators up the wrong way, and I think it can sort of skew our understanding of the data, because it's what matters in the end is the aggregate. It's the totality of the data, not the individual case studies. So I don't expect that we'll be announcing data quite as frequently as some companies have, but yes, we will have visibility to the data, and we'll be able to share it at least at regular intervals with you, and to communicate frequently. We've got two more. How can you guarantee that there won't be a similar outcome to the ATL 1102 trial? Certainly reopening some old wounds there. But look, to answer that question very honestly, there are no guarantees in drug development. As you heard earlier, this is an inherently risky and challenging field, and that is the nature of the business we're in. It is a high risk, high return business. But there are some very, very key differences between developing a drug in cancer and developing a drug in a disease like Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And there are some key differences between this drug and between 1102. And one of the key ones here is that the way that we measure efficacy in cancer is much more objective than the way we measure efficacy in a disease like Duchenne. In the Duchenne study, as veteran shareholders will recall, our endpoints are what we call functional endpoints. They're things like how quickly can a child walk a distance or climb a set of stairs. The Pool 2 score that we're using involves tests like how well a child can drink from a cup, things like that. Those are inherently very, very subjective measures. There's just no way around that. It just goes with the territory. But it does mean you need large patient samples and you need randomized controlled trials to really be confident about the data. In cancer, we look at two things generally. We look at whether tumors shrink, stay the same, or grow on an MRI scan or a CT scan. Tumors do not shrink by themselves as a rule, and generally they don't even stay the same size. So if a tumor is not growing, that's a very good sign that your drug is doing something. And if it's shrinking, that is almost certainly a sign that it's active. And that's a very, very objective measure of efficacy. Not available to us in Duchenne, but it is available here. And ultimately, the data that drugs are most often approved on is what we call survival data. It is data that asks the question, does this extend the life of the patient? And as a physician myself, I can assure you that survival is one thing that no doctor will misdiagnose. It is a very, very objective endpoint. And so we have much, much cleaner, more precise measurement tools in this disease than we did there. So that's one of the differences why I think we're in a very, very different space here, and really playing a different game. And then we have one more question here. Will you run the phase 2 study in the US or in Australia? Hopefully both. That's our plan. This drug has already been in the hands of half a dozen centers in the United States, including some of the top cancer centers in the world. And we really want to continue to build those kinds of relationships. They're a tremendous asset for a drug at this stage of development. But we also want to do some work close to home. We're a proudly Australian company. And candidly, we also want to take the maximum possible advantage of the federal government's R&D tax incentive scheme, which, as you know, will pay us back up to 43 cents on the dollar for money we spend here. So we will be reflecting both of those realities in the distribution. So we may even include a third or possibly even a fourth country in the fullness of time. But we expect the work to happen in both the United States and Australia at a minimum. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all the questions we've had come through online, and I think that's it here in the room as well. So just say once again, thank you for your patience during this period of transformation, and we're really looking forward to sharing more detail on this as we move forward. Thank you.